Welcome to Ancient Mysteries. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode, we're diving into a riddle wrapped in clay, buried beneath centuries of dust in the heart of Mesopotamia. It's a curious object, humble in appearance yet monumental in implication. Could an ancient artifact discovered near Baghdad be proof that electricity existed thousands of years before Edison? This is the story of the Baghdad Battery and the burning question: did the ancients possess power we've only just rediscovered? The story of the Baghdad Battery begins in the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia, a land nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now modern-day Iraq. Often celebrated as the birthplace of writing, law, and urban life, Mesopotamia was home to some of history's most advanced early societies, including the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and later the Parthians. These cultures built vast cities, developed complex religious systems, and engineered architectural marvels centuries ahead of their time. By the 1st centuries BCE, the Parthian Empire had established dominance over this region. Known for their prowess in warfare and their cosmopolitan blend of Greek, Persian, and local traditions, the Parthians were a society of innovation. They embraced technologies from the east and west and maintained active trade routes that stretched from Rome to China. Though much of their material culture remains fragmented, archaeological discoveries have painted a picture of a highly adaptive civilization, skilled in metallurgy, ceramics, and medicinal science. It was within this rich cultural tapestry that a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig made a startling discovery in 1938. While working at the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad, Koenig was cataloguing artifacts from a site near the village of Kujut Rabu, just outside the capital. Among the items was an unassuming clay jar, roughly 5 inches tall. At first glance, it appeared to be an ordinary storage container, but when Koenig examined it more closely, he noticed something unusual. Inside the jar was a copper cylinder, and nestled within that cylinder was an iron rod. The components were insulated from each other with what appeared to be bitumen, an ancient form of asphalt. The design seemed oddly deliberate, and the materials suggested functionality rather than decoration. Koenig, drawing from his knowledge of modern electrochemistry, made a bold proposal. This jar wasn't just a container. It might be an ancient battery. The idea sent ripples through the archaeological world. If Koenig was right, the Baghdad Battery could predate the invention of the voltaic pile by over a millennium. It would mean that ancient peoples understood, at least on some level, how to generate and possibly use electrical currents. The implications were staggering, but Koenig's theory was not without controversy. The jar lacked any inscriptions or documentation that might hint at its purpose. No other similar devices had been found at the time, and there was no clear evidence of what the alleged electricity might have been used for. Still, the object's construction was undeniably peculiar, and the possibility that it had once produced a mild electric charge was difficult to dismiss outright. As the artifact made its way into public consciousness, it became more than just an archaeological oddity. It became a symbol of lost knowledge, of forgotten innovation, and perhaps of civilizations that knew far more than we've been led to believe. The Baghdad Battery didn't just pose a technical mystery. It opened the door to a much larger question. What else have we overlooked in the ruins of the ancient world? The Baghdad Battery itself, once dismissed as an anomaly, began attracting attention from scientists and experimenters worldwide. Replicas were built, tests were run. In controlled environments, researchers filled recreated jars with vinegar or lemon juice to mimic an acidic electrolyte. The results were unexpected and fascinating. The makeshift batteries worked. Each replica generated a voltage of around 1 volt. Not enough to power a light bulb or modern device, but sufficient to demonstrate that the ancient components could indeed create an electrical charge. The implications of this weren't just speculative anymore, they were demonstrable. The materials used in the original jar, the copper, iron, bitumen and ceramic, weren't arranged randomly. They were arranged in a way that could function as a galvanic cell. This revelation raised immediate questions. If the Baghdad Battery really was capable of producing electricity, then what was it used for? Several theories quickly took shape. One of the most popular and persistent is that the device was used in electroplating, the process of coating a metal object with a thin layer of gold or silver using electrical current. Supporting this idea were several ancient artifacts discovered in the region that appeared to have a gold or silver finish. Some researchers proposed that electricity may have been used to create these effects far earlier than history credits. However, there was a problem. No conclusive evidence of electroplating workshops or written records supporting the use of electricity in this way had been found at the time. Still, the theory had enough traction to keep interest alive, especially in alternative history circles. Another, more conservative theory suggested that the device was used for ritual or medicinal purposes. Ancient cultures often attributed spiritual or healing properties to unknown phenomena. A mild electric shock, while not understood scientifically, might have been seen as divine or therapeutic. It's worth remembering that even in more recent centuries, people used electricity for dubious healing treatments long before its true properties were understood. Then there's the interpretation that has captivated the public imagination more than any other, the idea that the Baghdad Battery is a remnant of lost advanced knowledge. That somewhere in the ancient world, a civilization understood electricity well enough to harness it, only for that knowledge to vanish with time. To believers in this theory, the Baghdad Battery is not an isolated artifact. It's a glimpse through a crack in the wall of history, hinting at a forgotten chapter that predates our recorded understanding of science. As word of the battery spread, it began to appear in popular media. Television programs, magazines, and even video games began referencing the artifact, blending hard science with ancient mystery. Its story became legend, reshaped in countless ways, always circling back to that same central question: did the ancients have electricity? And yet, for all the replication and theorizing, there remains a frustrating gap in the record. No other identical batteries have been definitively proven to exist, and no written instructions or diagrams have ever surfaced. What we have is one artifact, one hypothesis, and a world of unanswered questions. But in archaeology, as in life, the absence of evidence is not always the evidence of absence. The academic world has long maintained a cautious stance on the Baghdad Battery. While some scholars acknowledge the possibility of electrochemical properties, most reject the notion that the artifact was deliberately engineered to produce electricity. Instead, they argue that its components were likely assembled for a more mundane purpose, possibly as a container for sacred scrolls or ceremonial objects, with the metal elements serving a structural or symbolic role rather than a functional one. Dr. Elizabeth Stone, an expert in Mesopotamian archaeology, has argued that while the components may resemble those of a galvanic cell, the absence of supporting artifacts or documentation significantly weakens the argument for an electrical function. "We have one jar," she said in an interview. "If this was a common or even experimental technology, we would expect to find workshops, manuals, or at least multiple examples. Instead, we have a single object out of context with no indication of its purpose beyond speculation." Others have echoed this sentiment, emphasizing the danger of applying modern scientific interpretations to ancient objects without cultural context. The term for this is presentism, the projection of current knowledge and values onto the past. To skeptics, calling the artifact a battery is an example of precisely that, a retroactive interpretation that may overlook more plausible, if less sensational, explanations. Still, the academic dismissal hasn't silenced all critics. Some point to the conservative nature of institutional archaeology as a barrier to accepting new paradigms. In their view, the lack of supporting evidence doesn't disprove the electrical theory. It simply highlights how little we truly know about the technological capabilities of ancient societies. And it's not as though this would be the first time that academia has underestimated the ancients. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, an astonishingly complex gear system found in a Greek shipwreck that baffled scientists for decades. Now widely accepted as an ancient analog computer, the device was initially dismissed as an out-of-place anomaly. It took years of research, imaging, and interdisciplinary collaboration before its true nature was understood. Could the Baghdad Battery fall into the same category? Could it be another outlier that forces scholars to revise timelines and rethink assumptions? Or is it simply a case of mistaken identity, an object twisted into legend by our desire to find mystery in the past? Some researchers suggest a middle ground. Perhaps the jar wasn't used for electroplating nor as a sacred relic, but as part of a natural discovery process. Maybe the ancients stumbled upon the interaction between acidic liquids and metals, and the resulting charge was noticed, if not fully understood. It wouldn't be the first time a great scientific principle was discovered through trial and error long before it could be explained. In this interpretation, the battery isn't proof of a lost civilization. It's evidence of curiosity, of ancient minds exploring the boundaries of the known world. And that, in many ways, is what makes the Baghdad Battery so enduring. Not because it rewrites history outright, but because it challenges us to ask better questions, to look deeper, and to never assume that the past was as primitive as we've been told. Outside the halls of academia, the Baghdad Battery has taken on a life of its own. It's become a cornerstone of alternative history circles, ancient astronaut theories, and fringe science documentaries. For many, it's more than an archaeological oddity. It's proof that the ancients possessed knowledge either lost to time or deliberately suppressed. One of the more widely circulated theories suggests that the Baghdad Battery wasn't an isolated tool, but part of a much larger technological infrastructure, perhaps even a rudimentary power grid. Proponents argue that if one such object existed, there must have been more. They point to temple walls, metallic artifacts, and ancient texts with cryptic symbols as potential clues of a forgotten age of electrical innovation. In some of these circles, the theory leaps from speculative to sensational. Some claim the batteries were used to power arc lamps in ancient temples, referencing inscriptions in Egypt and India that appear to show handheld objects emitting light. Others argue they could have been used to power ancient medical devices, suggesting that low-level electric shocks may have been used in healing rituals or surgical procedures. And then there are the more extreme interpretations. In the realm of ancient alien theories, the Baghdad Battery is often cited as evidence of extraterrestrial influence. According to this idea, advanced visitors from the stars shared electrical knowledge with early civilizations, only for it to be lost or hidden over time. Proponents of this theory often link the Baghdad Battery with other so-called out-of-place artifacts, like the Antikythera mechanism, the Piri-Reis map, or the Dendera light reliefs in Egypt. Together, they paint a picture of a high-tech prehistory, interrupted by catastrophe or conspiracy. Others suggest an even darker possibility, that ancient elites guarded the secret of electricity, using it to consolidate power over their populations. In this version, knowledge was never lost but withheld, passed down through hidden priesthoods or secret societies. The Baghdad Battery, they argue, is a sliver of evidence from a veiled tradition that kept technological power out of the public's hands for millennia. Of course, these ideas lack empirical support. Mainstream archaeologists argue that the claims rely on cherry-picked data, dubious interpretations, and a tendency to sensationalize the unknown. But these critiques haven't stopped the theories from spreading. In fact, the more the academic world pushes back, the more these ideas gain traction among those who feel conventional history has too often ignored the extraordinary. At their core, these fringe theories reflect a deep, human yearning for mystery and meaning. We want to believe the past was richer, stranger, and more advanced than our textbooks allow. The Baghdad Battery, in all its simplicity and ambiguity, offers a perfect vehicle for that belief. It's small enough to be overlooked, strange enough to defy easy explanation, and symbolic enough to carry the weight of ancient secrets. In a world dominated by cold rationalism, the battery offers a spark, literally and metaphorically, of wonder. Whether viewed through the lens of science or speculation, it forces us to ask the same provocative question. What if we've underestimated the ancients, and what might still be waiting to be uncovered beneath the sands of forgotten civilizations? What makes the Baghdad Battery endure isn't just its mystery, it's the timing of its rediscovery. Found in the early 20th century, During an age when science and archaeology were rapidly reshaping how we viewed the ancient world, the artifact arrived like a message in a bottle from a forgotten past. And perhaps more than anything, it resonated because it suggested something tantalizing, that the ancients were not behind us. They might, in some ways, have been ahead. This idea comes at a time when modern civilization is itself questioning the sustainability and wisdom of its progress. We live in an era defined by innovation, yet haunted by the fragility of our systems, energy grids, communication networks, digital infrastructure. We like to think of our age as the pinnacle of human achievement, yet so much of it depends on technologies only a few truly understand. The Baghdad Battery, in its modest way, forces us to confront our assumptions. If such an object could exist thousands of years ago, overlooked, dismissed, and then reconsidered, what else might lie beneath the surface, waiting for reinterpretation? What ancient discoveries have we misclassified, mislabeled, or simply ignored because they didn't fit within the accepted timeline? It also underscores how fragile knowledge can be. If the battery was electrical in function, and no written records or cultural markers were preserved to explain it, then we are reminded of how easily even profound understanding can vanish. Civilizations rise and fall, libraries burn, empires collapse, ideas disappear. And yet sometimes they leave behind clues, quiet, puzzling clues like this one, that echo through the ages. The Baghdad Battery, whether it lit up a sacred chamber, delivered a ceremonial shock, or simply stored scrolls, carries with it a question far more powerful than voltage. What have we lost, and what might we still rediscover? As we draw closer to the heart of the mystery, the Baghdad Battery reveals less about itself and more about us, our assumptions, our blind spots, and the limits of our imagination. It has become a symbol not only of what might have been, but of how we interpret the past through the lens of the present. The scholarly debates surrounding the artifact may not have settled on a definitive purpose, but they've opened important discussions about how we approach ancient technology. In many ways, the battery acts as a litmus test for belief. Do we see it as a practical tool, a misunderstood ritual object, or a relic of lost knowledge? Each answer reveals more about the interpreter than the artifact itself. We are reminded that history is not a fixed narrative, but a living dialogue between past and present. Every generation projects new meanings onto ancient artifacts. In the 1930s, the battery was an industrial curiosity. In the Cold War era, it became a metaphor for hidden power. Today, in the digital age, it's a mirror reflecting our anxiety about artificial intelligence, energy systems, and the fragility of our so-called modernity. The mystery also challenges the binary thinking that so often plagues our understanding of history. It doesn't have to be either a cutting-edge electrical device or a primitive container. The truth might lie in between, or in a completely different direction. It may have functioned in a way we don't yet recognize, using principles or purposes that have since vanished from human practice. And that leads us to perhaps the most important realization. The Baghdad Battery reminds us how much we've lost. For every artifact unearthed, countless others remain buried, broken, or erased by time. Oral traditions, experimental knowledge, entire paradigms of understanding, all gone. What survives is fragmentary at best. In this light, the battery becomes a metaphor for the fragility of human knowledge. It also raises ethical questions. Should we treat such artifacts with modern assumptions, or develop new interpretive frameworks that honor their cultural context? How do we balance scientific rigor with imaginative inquiry? And what do we owe the civilizations that left these remnants behind, not just in terms of preservation, but in our attempts to understand them? Finally, the Baghdad Battery invites us to remain humble. The ancient world was not a static prelude to our present. It was a complex, dynamic realm of experimentation, intuition, and invention. To assume that we have reached the pinnacle of technological understanding is not only arrogant, it's historically naive. And so we are left with a jar. A small, silent vessel, its copper and iron now darkened with age. It does not speak, but it provokes. In a world obsessed with progress, it whispers of things forgotten, and perhaps, just perhaps, of power once known. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Ben Carter, And this has been another episode of Ancient Mysteries. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you would like to support the show, subscribe to Ancient Mysteries on Spotify. The link is in the description. Subscribe now.